This Sicha was said 1961. That's 60 years ago. Okay. There we go. There's Mrs. Yaffe. Good evening, Mrs. Yaffe. Okay, she's like, make yourself a cup of coffee. This laptop is in Russian. Everything here is in Russian. Or is this Ukrainish? Is this Russian or Ukrainish? Today, before we start this year, we have a chazaka already that every year we come in prepared to learn the Sicha, and we almost never do it. Because there's always somebody else that's very important that we have to talk about. But this is supposed to be a shir in Sichas. But what we have to talk about today, before the shir, is that today is the 15th day of the month of Av. And it says about this day in the end, the last Mishnah, at the end of the Masechta about fasting, all kinds of inyanim about fasting. It's not a simple thing at all. There are many, many rituals and things that the Jewish people did on fasting days. And there were official fasting days like Yom Kippur, and then there were fasting days that were enacted by the Rabbanim, like Erev Purim. But it says in the end, in the last Mishnah there, that there were no days so happy in the whole Jewish year as the 15th of Av, which is today, and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippurim, it says there. So the Gemara says, we can understand why Yom Kippur is a very happy day. Because what could be happier than knowing that you're clean? All the mistakes you made in your life are gone. You did tshuva, Hashem accepted you, He cleansed you, He purified you. Wow. All these things that you were so nervous about them, you felt so guilty about. You thought, how can I ever live this down? Comes along Yom Kippur, and you're clean. How can you not be happy? So that's what it says. There were no days happier than the 15th of Av, which is today, and Yom Kippurim. But it says 15th of Av is even more. It says 15th of Av is first. And then it says Yom Kippur. So that means that today is the happiest day of the whole year. There's no day in the year so happy as today. So the Gemara says, what was so happy about it? What made it such a happy day? Well, the most important answer, it lists a number of things, a number of reasons why it's a happy day. Some are more important than others. Obviously, they're all important, but some are more important than others. The most important is that this is the day that the Jewish people realized that they were going to be allowed to leave the Midbar, the wilderness, and go into Eretz Yisrael. How did they know that? Because the opposite, what made Tisha B'Av such a tragic day, before the second base of Mikdash was destroyed, on Tisha B'Av. The first base of Mikdash was destroyed on Tisha B'Av. And before that, it was already a day of sadness, because this is the day that the Meraglim, the spies, came back with a bad report about Eretz Yisrael, and they told everybody, we can't go there. It's not going to work. We're going to be wiped out. We and our children are going to be annihilated. We cannot go into this land. It's a place of giants, and it's not habitable by us. And they convinced everybody, and Moshe and Aaron and Caleb and Yoshua tore their clothes with anguish when they heard that this is what people were saying. And they said, no, it's good. And nobody wanted to listen. And they cried all night long. They cried. Why did we leave Egypt? What are we getting into? This suicide. That Moshe and Aaron have led us to this suicide. And Hashem in the morning said, okay, you don't have to go. You don't want to, you don't have to go. They were 40 days scouting out the land. So you've got 40 years for those 40 days. And at the end of 40 years, you'll all be gone. No one will live more than 40 years. No one will live past the age of 60. Then when they suddenly realized what they had done, they said, no, we didn't mean it. We didn't mean it. Too late. It was too late. I told you a story maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago, about this friend of mine who married a 17-year-old. He was from Russia. He was a Russian bacher. His father was in Siberia in prison. He was here all alone. And he was a very fine bacher, and he got engaged to a 17-year-old American girl. Well, what could be more opposite in the cultural background? 17-year-old American whose father was a young Israel rabbi, with American values. And they were offered a shlichus to go to England on shlichus. And she was very nervous and very worried about how she would cope. And they had yechidus with the Rebbe. This is the early days. They had yechidus, and the Rebbe said, well, if you don't want to go, you don't have to. And she told me the story. She said, David Shalom, she said, I hope you never hear words like that. She was chilling. So she said, no, we'll go. And they went. Baruch Hashem, they went. So that's what happened. And on the anniversary of that fateful day, which was the 9th of Av, a year later, people who were 59 years old at the time turned 60. So what did they do? They went out into the field outside the camp and dug a grave and lay down in the grave and said Shema and Vidui, some of them, and Hamapil. They lay down, and the next day their family came and filled in the grave. And every year, same thing happened for the next 40 years. Until finally, those people who are now turning 60 did the same thing, dug their graves for themselves. They knew this is the night. 60 people, 60 years old, dig their grave, lie down, and say Kriya Shema, and Hashem, and they return their neshama to Hashem. And in the morning, they woke up. They're still alive. So that must be we made Rosh Chodesh on the wrong day. Today wasn't Tisha B'Av. Maybe today was the 8th of Av, and not the 9th. So the next night, which was really the 10th, they did the same thing again, and they dug their grave and they lay down, and they woke up. So this is very confusing for them. They kept on doing this because they took it very seriously. They thought this was the end of their life. But very soon they noticed that the moon was getting bigger and bigger. And once the moon was full on the 15th, like if you see the moon tonight, you'll see we have a nice clear night, full moon. No way. The calendar wasn't wrong. It's the 15th of the month. So that means that the Gezerah, the decree, is over. And we are going into Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Hashem. So that's why that's how the 15th of Av became established as a day of great happiness. There are many other things that happened when the Rebbe taught this idea to us. He ended up, Kain Tielanu. So should it be with us that this should be the day that we go out of exile and enter into a new era of goodness, the era of Mashiach, together with Mashiach. Now, more recently, in addition to all the other things that happen on this day, one thing that's very interesting, so as far as you are concerned, girls, it's something relevant to all of you, that this is a day that the girls, the unmarried girls, would go out in the vineyards. And it was Shidduchim day, Shidduchim time. And they would call out to the young men and say, young men, lift up your eyes and choose yourself a bride. And they would exchange clothes with one another so that nobody would be embarrassed for not having nice clothes. And those who were from good families would say, choose a girl from a good family. So you'll have good children from her. And those who are beautiful, obviously. And then there were those who were not beautiful. And they said, Bocher, I may not be beautiful, but you could help. Give me nice things. We'll make the best of it. The Rebbe touches the whole thing up in spiritual terms. That the ones who are not beautiful means in Torah and mitzvahs. So they were ready to take on themselves a life beautiful spiritually. It's not just talking about physically. So this was also a day of great happiness, a day of shidduchim. And there are many other things that took place on this day. You could read about them. There's all this on Chabad.org and in the Talmud. But there's something in more recent history that makes it a very special day. And that is that we are all taking part in Machon Liyadus under the umbrella of the National Committee for the Furtherance of Jewish Education, which was established by Rabbi Yaakov Yehuda Hecht, J.J. Hecht. And today, he used to say, today is his favorite day in the year. He also had established Camp Emunah for girls, and he used to spend Shabbos there, and he used to bring with the girls every Shabbos. And on this day, 30 years ago, he said to the girls, today is Chamisha Asar B'Av, the 15th of Av. It's my favorite day. I love this day more than any other day of the year. The Rebbe says a whole mimer about the idea of it being the 15th day, that the moon is full. When they saw the moon was full, they knew that the decree was over. So the moon is full is symbolic of the great light of the Geula for the Jewish people, which it represented to the Jews in the Midbar at that time. And even though the 15th of the month, the moon is always full of every month, so that our holidays, Pesach is on the 15th when the moon is full, and Sukkot is on the 15th when the moon is full. But the 15th of Av is greater than all of these days. Why? Because it's commensurate with the depth of the tragedy that came before it on Tisha B'Av. And since Tisha B'Av was such a tremendous tragedy, so the Geula of the 15th of Av is that much greater than any other 15th of Av of all the other months. I would add to this, the 15th of Av reveals a very deep secret, which is that the inner meaning of the 9 days and of Tisha B'Av is not tragedy, which is the way we celebrate, we honor these days. You know, we don't listen to music, we don't buy new clothes, we don't make chasanas, and so on during the 9 days. But the inner meaning of these 9 days is happiness and geula. And we know this because the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of hatred. People resenting each other and harming one another, backbiting, hypocrisy, telling people how much they admired them and then stabbing them in the back. These were the reasons. In the Gemara in Gittin, it tells the famous story of Kamsa bar Kamsa, where a person, because of a mistaken identity, that his name was Kamsa, and someone with a similar name, Bar Kamsa, got a wedding invitation, but he was an enemy of the host, the one making the wedding, and he threw him out. And he was so angry that he threw him out that he went to Rome, and he said bad things about the Jewish people. And so the Romans came and destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. It's for this, because of this, the Gemara concludes that the Beis Hamikdash is only destroyed because of this pointless hatred that the host couldn't, and was best friends with Bar Kamsa or Kamsa, and he couldn't stand Bar Kamsa. Well, Bar Kamsa wasn't such a nice person. He went and he squealed, made the worst possible trouble for the Jewish people, which caused the destruction of the temple and the exile and millions, literally millions of people being killed. No wonder he didn't like him. But because of that hatred, if he only could have forgiven him, he said, let me just say, just don't embarrass me, he said. Don't embarrass me. Don't throw me out. I'll pay for my meal. I'll pay for the whole feast. Just don't throw me out. Threw him out anyway. And there were rabbis there, and they didn't protest. No, because nobody protested, he said, that's it. He was filled with anger. The anger was like idol worship. And he went and he did what he did. So therefore, the Gemara concludes that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of this pointless hatred without a good reason. And the Rebbe says the way the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt is through love, Ahavas Yisrael, that has no good reason. So if you know somebody that you've been fighting with, or there's a resentment between you or bad feeling, and just, when they come in, you go to the other side of the room. Try and think of an excuse to start a conversation. Do you like coffee? Anything, just be nice. Say something nice. Break down that false barrier of resentment, because that's how the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt. So the inner meaning of these 9 days really is that feeling of love that will lead to, since the Geula is the opposite of Tisha B'Av, what's going to bring the Geula is Ahavas Yisrael. And Ahavas Yisrael is the inner theme of the whole month of Av. How do we know that? Because everything goes according to your head. Anybody who knows how to swim knows. Do you know how to swim? No. You have to learn. Someday you might be in a boat, and if heaven forbid it tips you, you'll have to know how to swim. You better go to the gym and where they have a pool and take lessons. Everybody has to know how to swim. Well, when you want to dive, if you don't keep your head down like this with your chin on your chest, then you look up to see where you're going. You're going to do what's called a belly flop. you're going to land on your tummy, which will turn your tummy all red if you do it. So yeah, the secret is, when you learn how to swim, is to keep your head down, because there's a general principle here of the Torah that your body will always follow your head. Wherever your head goes, your body follows your head. And similarly, in the month, everything goes after the head. And similarly in the Parsha. The name of the Parsha is from the first words, the first idea in the beginning of the Parsha. It contains the theme of the whole Parsha. And even in the word, the first letter sets the theme and the meaning of the whole word. And so on. The first letter of the whole Torah, base, sets the theme of the whole Torah, which is for bracha. There's a medrash about how all the letters wanted to have the merit of starting the Torah. And even Aleph said he wanted, and then said, no, not Aleph. We've got a good place for you in the 10 Commandments. It's going to start with you, Aleph, but not the whole. The whole Torah is only because Aleph starts the word for a curse, arur, but base is for blessing. Even in English, base is for blessing. So everything goes according to the head. And the head of the month of Av, first day of Av, influences the whole month, right? What happened on the first day of Av? We spoke about it 2 weeks ago. Exactly 2 weeks ago, we spoke about it. What was? Aaron passes away on the first day of Av. Remember we spoke about the garments of Aaron, how Moshe taking off the garments, and he had garments on underneath. And the garments underneath were spiritual garments, which we all have spiritual garments that from our thoughts and our words and our actions, they make garments. So even though Aaron was taking off the garments of the Kohen Gadol and preparing, as he prepared to return his soul to its maker, he was still clad in the same garments of the high priest, only they were spiritual. And Aaron, what's the idea of Aaron? At the same time, we were learned in Pirkei Avos, at the same time, be like Aaron, be like the followers of Aaron, love peace, pursue peace, love creatures, love Hashem's creatures, and bring them near, draw them near to the Torah, bring them in. So this is the theme of the first day of Av, which is Av is Chinam. Love creatures. The Rebbe says creatures. It doesn't say love people. It doesn't say love Jews. It says love creatures. They have no merit except that Hashem made them. You have to love them. A cockroach? Sure, I love cockroaches, but not in my home. Yes, 100%. Because they cause damage and they spread germs, and they can infest your food. They destroy your food. I know there's Mora Hani Broad told me that her father would not kill an insect. He would catch it and throw it out the window. He wouldn't. I'm not like that. There was a write-up on Chabad.org, or I think last week. No, it was on the sheet that they give out Farbrengen. Yeah, can you kill are you allowed to kill an insect like that? It says yes, but you can't cause it in a painful way. Shouldn't be a way to Tsar Balichai. They got. But some of these traps, they cause prolonged agony. That's not allowed. Okay, but the underlying theme we see there from this, that the underlying theme of the whole of Av is Ava, unlimited love, represented by Aaron, which we learn from Aaron HaKohen. But it comes out on the 15th. On the 15th it's revealed. When the moon is full, then we see what the month really is. How do we know that? Because we see the same thing in the month of Shavat. It's a famous discussion in the Mishnah. When is the new year for trees? So everybody knows Tu B'Shvat. All kinds of ceremonies and customs connected with Tu B'Shvat. We're going to eat 15 kinds of fruits, especially the 5 fruits that the Eretz Yisrael is praised for, plus grain and barley, which makes 7, the 7 fruits of Eretz Yisrael. That's what Beis Hillel says. But Beis Shammai says, no, you got it wrong. The New Year for trees is the first day of Shvat, because they always go according to the beginning, the potential. When is the potential greatest? When is a bride happiest? On her wedding day or on her 20th anniversary? Well, in a certain degree, Beis Hillel would say, it's the 20th anniversary. If she's worked hard at her marriage 20 years, she's got a lot to be happy about. She's got 18 children to come and to celebrate with her. But the happiness of the bride on her wedding day is something famous. The happiness of a bride on her wedding day. So Beis Shammai says that everything goes according to the beginning, to the potential. On Hanukkah, on the first night of Hanukkah, we're going to light 8 candles, because that's when the potential of candle lighting is the greatest. The next night, only 7, less. And he has a proof for it. In the Beis Hamikdash on Sukkot, they started bringing 13 bulls as the offerings of the day, and the next day 12, the next day 11. Through the 7 days of Sukkot, add them all up, it comes up to 70 bulls, which is a source of blessing to all the 70 nations of the world. And the Talmud says, if the nations of the world knew how much blessing they get from the Jewish people offering on Sukkot, they would send armies to defend the Beis Hamikdash. They wouldn't want to destroy it. Their whole lifeline comes from these offerings. So he says, see, that's a principle in Torah. You start off with a lot and you get less and less and less and less. The Rebbe explains it that when a prize fighter comes into the ring in the first round, he hits his opponent with all his might and weakens him. So then if he doesn't finish him off within 3 minutes, he'll come back and finish him off the next round or the next round. He basically finished him off. The rest of the fight is just finishing it up. So that's how Beis Shammai understands. Beis Hillel says, no, that's not how you do things. You do things little by little. You build up a building, but you start with the foundation, and you build and you build and you build. You get bigger and bigger. You start with a little business, a ma and pa kettle, have their grocery store, and then they buy the storefront next door. They get a little bit bigger, and then before you know it, you've got Kosher World, and then you've got Marketplace, and then you've got Huna, and then you build and build and build and build. So Hanukkah is each night we add light and add light and add light until the 8th night of Hanukkah, the menorah is blazing with light, which goes on through the rest of the year. So this is the famous machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and we can apply it to the month of Av. That Elu Divrei Elokim Chaim, they're both right, and according to Beis Shammai, it's all there from the very first. Just like the first day of Shvat is the new year for trees, the first day of Menachem Av sets the tone for the whole month, which is Avas Yischinam, love without any reason whatsoever, which is Geula. That is Geula. If you can get there, then you personally have experienced redemption. If you can love someone like that, wow, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Okay. So that's some of the reasons that J.J. Hecht on the 15th of Av said to the girls in Mechol Chana, I love Chamisha Asar B'Av. I love Tu B'Av. It's my favorite day of the whole year. That day we had a concert in the country. The organization I work with, Sivas Hashem, made a concert. It was pouring with rain. My director, Yerachmiel Ben Yaminson, went to the Rebbe and asked the blessing, please, that we shouldn't get rained out and lose all the money we've invested in this concert. But it didn't help. It kept on raining and pouring and pouring and pouring. The concert had to come. It was at a raceway in the mountains, the Monticello Raceway. We had to come indoors. It was very cramped. A lot of people didn't show up because of the rain. The people who did show up was very uncomfortable. And as the concert began, we heard an announcement that people were being asked to say Tehillim because Rabbi Hecht, we just heard it, had a heart attack. And we said Tehillim, and then came word that it was too late and the concert was canceled. It was a poor, raining, terrible day. So there you are, the paradox of Tu B'Av. Last night was 30 years ago today. Last night, his family, who are the Zavulun, that is to say, they oversee the Machon Yadus. They were originally appointed by the Rebbe. Rabbi Hecht was appointed by the Rebbe to oversee the runnings of the Machon Chan when Machon Chan was founded, that it should run properly and well. And when certain things happened a few years back, which made things very complicated, so Rabbi Majeski went to Rabbi Hecht and asked him if he would be willing to resume his original role. Actually, his son, Sholem Ber, and his brothers, they would resume their original role as overseeing the running of the yeshiva. And they said yes, and they own the building in which we learn at 825 Eastern Parkway, which was the original home of Machon Chana, and now it's the home of Machon Yadus. So they told many stories about Rabbi Hecht. And one story that stands out in my mind is there was a boy, one day they came, he was keeping a shul alive in East Flatbush when East Flatbush was dying out. Now it's coming back because people can't afford to live in Crown Heights anymore and they're moving into East Flatbush. But he had a shul there. There were a few rabbis, a few of the old guard who were holding out shuls there. Rabbi Teitelbaum, Rabbi Bucket, people whose children are shluchim today. And Rabbi Hecht. But to keep the minyan going, he used to bring Bachrim every morning. He'd bring Bachrim down. And Rabbi Teitelbaum also, you know the chazan who sings at the end of the video, Yehi Ratzon, Moshe Chertolashevsky. So he would bring Bachrim, my son was one of them, to Rabbi Teitelbaum. Rabbi Hecht would bring Bachrim to his shul. And when they came back one Friday, no, it was Erev Yom Kippur. They came back Erev Yom Kippur. There was a boy standing outside the building. And he looked very sad. And he said, Rabbi Hecht, he said, yes. He said, it's Yom Kippur tonight. I have no money. I don't have clothes. I don't have a suit for Yom Kippur. Can you possibly give me money to buy a suit? And Rabbi Hecht was a very kind and generous person. And he said, no, I'll give you a suit. Come to my house. I'll give you a suit. You're just the right size. Come, pick up a suit. You don't have to go buy a suit. Who knows it's going to fit? Come to my house. I'll give you a suit. I have nice suits, you know. He hobnobbed with high politicians, big politicians. He was he had a radio program. He was very influential person in the Jewish world. And he played the part. He was the Rebbe's he was Rebbe's voice in the English-speaking world here in America. So, and he was right on the mark. Come to my house, I'll give you my suit. This was Rabbi Hecht, you see. He gave a person the shirt off his back. Then he asked later in the day, did the Bacher ever come around? No, he never showed up. He says, that's because he didn't want a suit. He wanted the money to go buy drugs. He just confronted him that way. But he was just tremendous. The Rebbe wanted something done. That was the address. If the Rebbe wanted something, there was no, to say it was impossible was not an option. And other people would say they couldn't do it. Rebbe didn't know what those words meant. So when there was a revolution in 1978 in Iran, any of you remember that? You still were alive yet? Probably not even alive yet. When they overthrew the Shah, who was very good ruler, but the fundamentalist Muslims overthrew him. The Ayatollah took over, and life became very difficult for the Jewish people who were living in affluence in Iran at that time, Persia. And it was necessary to try and get the children out. And the Rebbe said to Rabbi Hecht, we've got to get the children out. And he took on this unbelievable project. Can you imagine being assigned such a job? I couldn't have dealt with it. No way. To get those children, as many as possible, thousands of children. He brought them out of, I think, not many. Bringing them out, bringing them here to America, getting them visas they should be allowed in, and getting them into schools to be educated, and getting them into, and teaching them. A lot of them didn't know anything about Yiddishkeit. Teaching them and integrating them into religious society. A lot of Persian Jews today in Queens, in Los Angeles, in all the cities where they settled, they're here in America with observant families because of what Rabbi Hecht did for them. And they didn't become Hasidim. Most of them did not become Hasidim. A couple of them were in our community, you know, the caterers, the Cohen brothers who do the catering. But most of them became involved with Persian communities or established their own communities. But he's the one who took the credit. He made a special camp for them. In addition to Camp Emun, he made a special camp for them. He knew that there'd be no place for them in Tishrei. Tishrei is so crowded. So he kept the camp open 2 more months after all the other camps. And all that cost money, cost a lot of money. To bring them, to house them, to feed them, had to raise all that money, millions of dollars. So this is Rabbi Hecht's special day. A friend of mine told me, he was very close with Rabbi Hecht. On Sukkot, people would come to him and say, how did they get an esrog in those days? It wasn't like today. We have stores and you go choose in the store. You went to Rabbi Jacobson, who was the head of Hadar Torah in that time. And he was the source of Italian esrogim. You go to his house and you pick an esrog for him, depending on your budget, how much you could afford to pay, and what your standards were, how beautiful an esrog you wanted to get. So they described last night that it depended on the rooms in the house. They would go up, he would go with his children to teach them how to do this. Rabbi Jacobson would show them the different rooms, take them to the room. He says, here's 10 esrogim that I've selected for the Rebbe. He took one, there are 9 left. You can choose which one you want. And he would spend a long time choosing just the right esrog, and just the right lulav, and just the right hadassim. I think the Arabas, they would buy on the Erev Sukkot on the street. But then there were all the members of his community and his shul, all the members of his shul who would come to him and say, Rabbi Hecht, you're going to get me an esrog this year? No problem. He would get an esrog and he would get an esrog that he would use, not less than what he says. I can't give someone an esrog that I personally would not use. And then they would come to him and they say, well, how much is an esrog? Well, to them, it was just like a lemon. You know, what does a lemon cost? 30 cents. So maybe they'd feel generous. They'd give him $1, $2. If they felt really flushed, they might give him $5. Of course, it cost a lot more than that, as you know. And he never asked them for the money. That was his mivtzoyim, to make sure that everybody had lulav and esrog on Sukkot. But then he had to find the money. Anyway, a friend of mine was a bacher in Hadar Torah in those days. He was very friendly with Rabbi Han. Rabbi Han was a very friendly person. He was very approachable. You could stop him on the street. You could meet him anywhere. You could tell him if you had a serious problem, he wouldn't rest until he had helped you to solve it. He was unique. He was great. The Rebbe loved him so much because of that. And he told this friend of mine, he had a great sense of humor. He had told this friend of mine, he says, I am the Rebbe's. The Rebbe will never get a better horse than me. Now, to understand that, you have to understand what is a horse to a Cossack. A horse to a Cossack is more than his life. It's more than anything, his most precious possession. The horse of a Cossack has courage, has strength, has a feeling for other horses. It will take the rider where the rider needs to go, has to go, and wants to go. So Rabbi Hecht, he said, I'm the Rebbe's horse. He'll never get a better horse than me. That's how he looked on himself. And that's what the Rebbe cared. That's how the Rebbe is. And they told one story. They said one time he used to meet with the Rebbe regularly because he reported to the Rebbe about everything he was doing, and he had 100 different projects that he was in charge of. Mahon Chana was one, Hadar Torah was another, Camp Emunah, the Iranian boys, and he was the first one to bring chickens to Crown Heights. We used to go to the slaughterhouse. In the middle of the night, we'd get up, go to the mikveh, and then go to the slaughterhouse and wait in line and buy a chicken and take it to the sheikhet. And wait, because then take it to the sheikhet. And most people didn't do that. Only the diehards and the enthusiasts and Balei Tshuva would do it. So he made it possible for people to do kaparas. He was the first one to bring chickens to Crown Heights to make, that's a big project. And he had all these projects on his head. And he was a Rav. So he had conversions, and he had chasanas, and he had divorces, and couples who were fighting with each other, and wills, and a million things that he had to straighten out and deal with. One time, so he was always in conference with the Rebbe, very regularly. One time he was in the Rebbe's room, and they were talking. He said something very sharp to the Rebbe. I don't know what it was. And the Rebbe said to him, the Rebbe was shocked, got a little shocked. He said, would you talk to your father like that? And he said, yes, I would. Yes, I would. The Rebbe said, why would you talk to your father like that? So he said, because I know my father loves me and he thinks about me all the time. So the Rebbe said, Gloimir, believe me, I love you more than your father does, and I think about you more than your father does. And one other story that is really remarkable, because we have to know, he's overseeing this moised now. There was a time the Rebbe took his name off the moised because something was done improperly. And there was a rally of Tzivos Hashem on the yard site of the Rebbe's mother. At the end, you can listen to it. You can find it on YouTube, I'm sure, where he made a speech to the Rebbe and begged the Rebbe to give his mother's name back to the Moised. That is remarkable. Anyway, on Simchas Torah, the mashke, the Crown Royal, flowed in his shul in East Flatbush like water. And after hakafas were over, then the people would totter out and walk up half an hour, 3/4 of an hour to Crown Heights to the hakafas with the Rebbe, which would be getting underway around midnight. It would just be maybe finishing up the Atar races by midnight, maybe even later. And politicians would come, and ambassadors, and the Israeli embassy would come, because they could drive over, because they were keeping only one day Yontif. Simple story wasn't Yontif anymore, but for them. And the Rebbe would conference with them in the middle of Simchas Torah, in the middle of the rejoicing. And he said they came in and they took their places, and then when it was all over, the Rebbe turned to leave, and he turned to Rabbi Hecht. Oh, and when they left the shul, so the person told the story, he says, Rabbi Hecht came over to me and he threw his arm around me. You know, when people are shikr, they do things like that. He threw his arm around me and he said, Kalman, I want to tell you that tonight I fell asleep at the table and I had a dream that I was standing beside the Rebbe. Very close. And I wanted to give the Rebbe a kiss. I so much wanted to give the Rebbe a hug and give him a kiss. And I thought, I'm a Hasid. I can't do that. The Hasidim would kill me. They would tear me apart. And I woke up. He told Kalman this story. Okay, and they walked up, to Crown Heights, finish hakafas with the Rebbe. When hakafas were over, the Rebbe turned, he saw Rabbi Hecht, and he went like that with his hand. Because somebody else saw it. The guy who told the story last night, someone came over to me and said, did you see what happened? He says, no, I didn't see, because he was down in the crowd. He couldn't see above the head, people around him. But on Shabbos, I mentioned this last Shabbos to a friend of mine that Chamish Asabav was coming up in the art side of Rabbi Hecht. And he said, and he told me the story and he showed me this, what the Rebbe did. Amazing story. All right. Parshas Eikev. Parshas Eikev, the Rebbe talks about the mon, the manna that the Jewish people ate for 40 years in the wilderness. Even the matzah that they took with them out of Egypt had qualities of the man, that it was totally nourishing. It tasted like anything that they wanted it to taste like. And it was totally absorbed in their system. It produced no waste. So that was one of the things they complained about the man. Who heard of food that produced no waste? Maybe we're going to die. If the plumbing doesn't work, you could die. We say a blessing. The second blessing we say in the morning, we thank God that the plumbing should work. That we can excrete the waste. And the man had no waste. And people were worried about it. And we have two opposites here with the man. That it was it brought with it great wealth. So it was a food of affluence, but it was also a food of poverty. Why was it a food of affluence? Because it was unlike any other food that there could be. Can you imagine a food that would taste like anything you wanted? Some people are crazy about sushi. It would taste like sushi. I'm not one of those devotees. But everybody, other people, come Pesach, after Achron Shal Pesach, there's a stampede. As soon as Pesach is over, to get pizza. Who can live without pizza? Well, the man could taste like pizza too. The man couldn't taste like certain non-kosher foods. And it couldn't taste, it couldn't taste like cucumbers, which are my favorite. Couldn't taste like squash or garlic, because these are foods that are not good for nursing mothers. The milk would taste like garlic. The child wouldn't like it. Wouldn't be good for the child. Watermelon. There's few things the man wouldn't taste like, but otherwise tastes like anything. And yet the people complained about it. Why did they complain? Because it was also food of affluence, because the Medrash tells us that when they went to pick out the man, to collect the man every day, there were jewels together with the man. So they became physically rich. There was no one to, trade the money, and there was nothing they had to buy. But they could keep the jewels. In fact, and they used the jewels later for the Beis Hamikdash and for the garments of the Kohen Gadol. They became very, very rich. But the man also made them feel impoverished. Why is that? So there are interesting reasons why, even though it could taste like anything they wanted it to taste like, there's a saying from the Talmud that you can't enjoy something that you can't see. A blind person will never smile. And if he smiles, it's not like the smile of a person who can see. You may have noticed this. You may have known someone who was really blind. Can't smile. And it says that you can't ever be satisfied from food that you can't see what it is that you're eating. Because you always think, maybe I didn't finish. You don't know how much is really there. So it could never satisfy them, even though it could taste like anything, but it always left them hungry. And there's a deeper reason for this. Here you see on page 24, he brings it down in the third paragraph. A person who sees what he is eating cannot be compared to a person who does not see what he's eating. So they could never feel satisfied. Another reason they couldn't feel satisfied, brings in the paragraph just before that, is because they couldn't keep it. They had to go collect man every day. And that was a very important lesson to them, that we have to know every day to ask Hashem for our livelihood. We can never rely on what's in the bank. Can come along a corona and businesses are wiped out overnight. Well, in a few months anyway. How many businesses are wiped out? How many people are on unemployment now? They can't work. They lost their job. And they don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And banks are closing down. Currency is being what's the word for it? Devalued. And who knows, maybe the yen is going to take over. And then the American dollar is going to be worth bupkis. And your life savings are going to be wiped out. I'm getting emails every day. Buy gold. Gold won't be devalued. Commodity. It's a commodity. It's whatever it's worth, it will be worth no matter what the currency is. The currency is just what the government prints. It's nothing but paper. Currency is only a promissory note that I'll pay you money. Well, in Brazil that happened, right? All the currency was devalued. People lost their whole fortune. Brazil used to be very wealthy, and then the government screwed up, and it could happen here. Everything that people relied upon, you can't go to the bank to get it even. In certain places here, you can go, but in certain countries, you can't even go to the bank. The banks are closed. Total uncertainty. So the uncertainty was connected with the man, because I have food for today, but I don't know. Maybe there's not going to be man tomorrow. And when the Jews heard in the wilderness that they couldn't go out to collect the man on Shabbos, they said, well, what's going to be? Because the man didn't last overnight. Some people, Dasan and Aviram, tried to keep the man until tomorrow. It went wormy. It's full of worms. It was moldy and wormy. What's going to be tomorrow? So this was the miracle of the man, that the man from Friday lasted on Saturday, on Shabbos. That's why we have 2 challahs on the table, to remember the man. Lasted for 2 days. And it was a miracle food. If I had 8 children, I went out and I collected enough man for myself and my wife. When I got home, I had enough for 10 of us. And if I collected man for 16, it should last for 2 days. When I got home, it was enough for 8, for 10. It didn't make sense. It didn't follow the laws of nature. So that was miraculous. But at the same time, since I didn't know what I would have tomorrow, it left me in great uncertainty and anxiety. What's going to be for tomorrow? So that's why it was a food of affluence, because it tasted like anything I wanted, and it came with jewels. But it was a food of poverty, because it left me always anxious and unsatisfied and hungry. You know, like some of you eat Chinese food sometimes. This is well known. You go to a restaurant, you have Chinese food, and after half an hour, you're hungry. It doesn't fill you up. Maybe that's why the Chinese people are often very skinny. But they're very fat Chinese too. So that's not a rule we can go by. Certainly not an idea I should be publicized in this class. But why is it? So underlying all this is the same principle. It's not explained in the Sicha, but it's there behind the Sicha. It's like the Luches in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies, that the Luches had a certain dimension and weight and color. They had physical qualities to them. Certain kind of blue stone called sanpirinon. Was it like sapphire? Most precious stones in the world, as would only be fitting for the 10 Commandments. But at the same time, they occupied an amma by an amma, depth amma, and they were in the box, which had a certain size. But when they measured the distance between the box and the walls, it didn't take up any space. So if the holy room in the Mishkan was 10 amas across, so it was from this edge of the Aron to the wall was 5 amas. From the other edge of the Aron to the wall was 5 amas. Where was the Aron? Didn't occupy space, because it had the holy tablets in it, which were given by God. And therefore they were higher than nature. They were not limited by nature. So similarly, the man, which was from heaven, it wasn't something that they worked and plant like an Eretz Yisrael. You have to plow the land and clean the land and plant and water, and you have to have favorable climatic conditions, sunshine, good weather, that the grain should grow, and then you have to harvest it, and then you have to beat it to get the seeds out, and then thresh it to get rid of the chaff, so that the wind will blow away the chaff and leave the seeds. Then you have to grind the seeds to get out the flour. Then you have to mix the flour with water. Then you have to put in a leavening agent so that it will rise. And then you have to bake it. So to bake it, you need to have wood. You need to make a fire. All these labors are we do not, these are how we learn the things we don't do on Shabbos. It's a whole section of Shabbos that we learn from what you had to do to make bread. You didn't have to do anything to make the man. So when you make bread, when Mrs. Pape makes bread, oh, it's so good. Because it's a lot of work what goes into it. And you can taste the work. It's delicious. The man, you couldn't taste the work. It was from Hashem. It was a gift. And a person will always prefer one thing that he made himself to 9 times as much as someone else gives him. Person enjoys the work of his own hands more than what somebody else did for him. So the man didn't provide that satisfaction because it was from God. And because it was from God, like God is not limited, the man was not limited. Could taste like anything. And just like godliness is pure and holy through and through, there's no klippa, there's no evil, there's only goodness, there's only wholeness and chayas and life. So the man had nothing, no waste, because it was holy. It was food from heaven. You know what blessing they said on the man? Hamoitzi lechem min hashamayim. Only when they came into Eretz Yisrael with Yoshua did they have a moitzi lechem min haaretz. The first blessing was established by Moshe, Birkas Hamazon, Baruch Atah Hashem, Hazan es hakol. You create all the food that we need. That's the man. But with Yeshua, we said, Baruch Hashem, al haaretz ve'al hamazon, for the land and for the food that we get from the land. So because the man shared these qualities of the infinite, qualities of godliness, transcendent qualities, they're higher than nature, that's why the man had these 2 conflicting aspects to it. That it was the ultimate in what the world could offer, any taste you want, wealth, and the ultimate in poverty, because you could never put it in the bank, could never save for the future. And you couldn't enjoy it because something you can't hold, you can't really enjoy. And because you didn't know, you never knew what tomorrow was going to bring. But that's what the lesson Hashem wanted us to learn, was that every day he's supplying us. And that's the reality. So the lesson is that we shouldn't be deceived by the gashmias of the world around us. Now the conclusion here, turn to page 29. That there are 2 kinds of knowledge. There's knowledge that's connected with worldliness, and there's knowledge that's connected with godliness. And even in Torah, we have knowledge that's connected with worldliness, and that's the revealed part of the Torah, which is full of times and limits and measures. Lighting candles is a transcendently beautiful experience, but there's a time when you have to do it and a time when you shouldn't do it. After Shkia, not allowed to do it. There's a time we need 10 people to make a minyan. We can't, there are limits and measures to everything. And similarly in the Torah, there's the limits, the revealed part of the Torah, which teaches us the dimensions and the logic and the way to do all the mitzvahs. But then there's the godliness in the mitzvahs, that's Hasidus. So you see what the Rebbe says here. The Yetzer Hara is very experienced. And the Yetzer Hara knows it's impossible to convince a Jew to deny the importance of Torah. Every Jew knows that Torah is the center of our life. Even Ahav, in English, Ahab, yeah, who introduced idol worship, considered the Torah the jewel of his eye. So when the Yetzer Hara wants to draw a person away from the study of the Torah and the study of Panemius Torah, he goes about it in an indirect way. He says, since the Torah is unlimited, like the man, right? Since the Torah is unlimited, you're never going to master it. As much as you learn, you're never going to know anything. There's always going to be an infinite amount more that you didn't learn. And even what you learned, you don't understand it fully. So the more you learn, the further you feel away from comprehending, from knowing anything. So the best course is become a doctor or a lawyer or a business person and be good at it and make a lot of money and join the club and have a house in the country and a cabana in Mexico and a big house on President Street, and you'll be very happy. And if you say, no, I have to learn Torah too. So he says, okay, so learn Torah, but with a measure. In the world of measurements, you'll learn a halacha in the morning, you'll learn a halacha at night, you'll do hayom yom, someone will tell you a short sentence about Geula and Moshiach, and you did your thing. Now go earn money. Go buy some clothes. I know a young man, he works. He has 16 pairs of shoes. So the Yetzer Hara says, well, learn a law or two, but if you want to be really careful, learn a Mishnah, learn 2 Mishnayos, but don't go overboard. And then he says about the subject matter here on page 30. He says, stick with Nigla. Nigla is about the world we live in. This is the complaint of the Misnagid. Don't bother me with Panemius Torah, with Hasidus. I don't understand all this stuff anyway. Give me something I can understand. Weights and measures I can understand. So a person has to realize, page 30 at the bottom, right, that these are the arguments of the Yetzer Hara. He's expert in his craft. And he's saying, don't involve yourself with the man as it's bread from Shamayim. Just deal with bread from the earth. Well, says the Rebbe, and these are chilling words. Pay attention, girls. And when you get married in Mitzvah Shem B'Karev, you make sure your husband knows this. That this is the first step away from the path of Torah altogether. By accepting one little bit of the Yetzer Hara's argument, a person allows himself to fall deeper and deeper into his snares. And that's what our sages taught us, that the Yetzer Hara, once he gets his foot in the door, you can't get rid of him. He comes as a guest who's staying only for tea, but then he stays overnight, and eventually he becomes the owner of the house. Very interesting. There's a playwright in England, Harold Pinter, Jewish guy. He wrote a play called The Servant, in which a rich young man has a servant who takes care of him. They do that, in the upper classes. And this servant he's become so dependent on the servant ends up bossing him around and controlling his whole life. And that's a Jewish insight into the Yetzer Hara, how he works. So it says the Jewish people started off that they complained about the man. They were nervous about the man because it had no waste and it didn't satisfy them. The Torah tells us they complained about the man. And then they got into a deeper trouble. They said they wanted ordinary food. They wanted meat. So Moshe brought them the slav, which was meat. Yeah. But soon they were weeping, not about the man, they were weeping with their families. What do you mean weeping with their families? Rashi says, bringing from the sages, what's the footnote here? From the Gemara in Yuma, that they were weeping because the Torah was prohibiting them from marrying in the family, incest and adultery. That's what they were weeping about. And the Torah just hints about it because it doesn't want to embarrass the Jews. So the Yetzer Hara's argument is that you should stick with the material and avoid the spiritual because it's beyond you. It's not a good argument. It's death. It's destructive. It will destroy you. Because when a person cuts himself off from Ruchnius and involves himself only in Gashmius, it's curtains. He will never be satisfied no matter how much he achieves, no matter how much Nigla he learns, no matter how much money he amasses. It will never be enough. A person who has 100 wants 200. He has 200, he wants 400. If he has 400, he wants 800. He never will be satisfied. So it's a faulty argument. And he concludes, the only way, and it doesn't go according to our, because the essence of what we are is Ruchnius. Since our essence is Ruchnius, the only thing that can satisfy us is Ruchnius. So we have to shed our desire for worldly things, for the pleasures of this world, and then we will be able to enjoy Hashem's abundant generosity, which is far greater than anything that we could possibly accept. And since he regards spiritual and material as the same, he will be granted unlimited measures of both of them together. Thank you very much, girls. We're only a quarter of an hour over time. If you go now to 770 live, you'll be just in time for Ma'ariv at 7:30, and then a Siyum. The Rebbe said we should have Siyumim these days. So you can catch a Siyum on 770live.com. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shach